Hello and welcome to my presentation on what the hell is growth, an actionable guide for growth marketing for startups and businesses. So I'm very excited that you can be here with me today. And thank you so much for all your patience in my response. I've received lots of requests for copies of the video for people who couldn't attend. So thank you so much and thank you for your patience. Without further ado, here it goes. Just a few notes before we start. Obviously, no one else is on the call, so we're going to be skipping over some of the practice activities. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at daniel@wescalestartups.com or tweet me at djohnsonxyz. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. I'll probably respond a bit quicker via Twitter. We're going to be going through a lot of information here. And because there's no one else to stop me, some of it may not make sense, and that's absolutely fine. Feel free to message me, answer any questions you have, and we'll take it from there. So without further ado, here we go. Cool. So a bit of background. I developed this presentation as this is the third iteration of my What the Hell is Growth presentation. The first one came from a workshop in Nigeria with Google's Launchpad program, the Accelerate program that I ran, or I ran this workshop. And it was a culmination of a bunch of different pieces of knowledge that I've had over the past few years that I've assembled into one document that I think is really important. It covers some of the core fundamentals of what I believe is important regarding growth. And I'm really excited to share that with you today. I'm not going to sell anything. I'm going to do a pitch for We Scale Startups at the end, but my goal here is that you learn and that you take away some like really practical tips that you can implement on your business. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, please feel free to message me and I'm happy to help. So let's begin. Today, my three main objectives for you are discover what growth marketing actually is, understand why it's important, and understand how to apply it to your own company. So fairly simple there. Expectations, I mean, obviously, please pay attention, stay engaged, and feel free to ask me questions. And also, my goal for you is that you can perform your own growth marketing experiments. So, who am I and why am I talking about growth marketing? So, I've been involved in growth marketing for startups ever since selling my own company at 18. I've worked in a variety of companies around the world, including apps, SaaS, e-commerce, crypto, and a wide variety. And I find that as long as you focus on the core fundamentals of what problem am I solving, who's my customer, and how do I communicate the value proposition of my business to my customers, you can be fairly industry agnostic. Obviously, there's some sort of caveats based on business model and various other things, but on the whole, it's about focusing on the core fundamentals. And what that's allowed me to do is generate over £60 million in sales over the past 2 years for some of my clients. Over 50% of everyone on the internet, so probably you, have seen We Scale Startups' work over the past year or two. I've spoken at Cambridge and a whole bunch of other universities and a bunch of private organizations about my work and how to apply it to theory. And also, I've had the great fortune of working with startups, over 100 startups, in fact, over in 12 countries over the past few years. Unfortunately, not that many recently, but I'm looking forward to traveling to different places and working with different startups. And as cliched as it sounds, and as dramatic as it sounds, I believe that startups have the opportunity to potentially save the world by identifying some of the biggest challenges that humanity faces and understanding how do we fix those challenges or how do we start dealing with these challenges and I believe startups are in a great place to do so. And I want to support the startup ecosystem by sharing knowledge like this so that they can continue with their endeavors and we can develop more startups worldwide. So in order for us to actually understand what growth marketing is, we have to understand a few core fundamentals. So when we talk about data, what do we mean? Lots of people talk about being data-driven, but what does that actually mean? Why is data important and how do we use it? So how do we actually implement it into a business and a practical perspective? Understand what key performance indicators and North Star metrics are. We have to learn a bit more about the growth marketing funnel and figure out what the difference between a startup and a business is. I hope you're all with me so far. So why is data important? So I talk a lot about data, but without actually sort of explaining the why behind it, it can be a bit understanding. a bit difficult to understand. So a few years ago, my little sister came up to me and said, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "Marketing." It was kind of difficult to tell a 16-year-old much more about growth marketing. And she recently had been binging a lot of Netflix and seen Mad Men, and she thought that marketing was sitting in lovely restaurants, smoking cigars, drinking gin martinis. And as much as I wish that was the case, it's now all about numbers. Most of my job involves me going through spreadsheets, whether that's looking at attribution models, whether that's calculating predictions, whether that's just listing information. But most of my work, and what I said to her is spreadsheets. And the reason is that modern marketing is all about numbers, and numbers turn into data, which turns into information. And we'll be covering a bit more about that later on. But essentially, modern marketing is inseparable from data. They're essentially the same thing. And it's really important. And the reason why I stick it at the beginning of my presentation is because I believe that this is an important thing to realize or to sort of conceptualize early on in your journey. So data is not part of marketing, data is marketing. And it's almost not hypocritical, it's almost contradictory to say data is a part of marketing, because modern marketing is essentially all about data. A lot more than I think a lot of people understand. I love this quote: "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And I think that's very true, and increasingly true with modern marketing, because it's all about not listening to our own biases, not listening to our own sort of issues, always making sure that we focus on sort of quantifiable, ideally, numerical data, which allows us to ensure we remain objective as we create campaigns, as we look at data, as we look at the results of campaigns, as we look at human behavior, all these kind of things, and we don't bias it with our own opinions. And so I talk a lot about data, but what actually is data? And data is a very simple way of saying any information that we gather between the relationship between a brand and consumer. So any sort of touch point that we have, whether that's how people experience our content, our brand, how people discover us, how people interact with us, not even necessarily the product itself, but also sort of the marketing material. And it's a very broad term for a very broad thing, because you can have lots of different types of data. You can have some data is how people visit your website. Some data is the types of people that are on your customer list. Some data is how people interact, how our users interact on other platforms, so that we can understand human behavior a bit better. So it's a very broad term encompassing our brand, our customers, and everything in between. And generally, you can write this data down. Generally, data is quantifiable, so it's numbers of some sort, and it allows you to stick it into a sheet. Very broad definition, but it's essentially the process of tracking everything. So the reason why we track data is for these main three goals. 1, attribution, discover how people find us. 2, behavior, what do they do once they visit us? And 3, goals. It helps us understand how closely we are to hitting our goals or not. And with that, it allows us to follow this process. So data in itself is kind of useless. In fact, if I said to you, what data by itself is kind of useless. It's about what we do with that data that allows us to make it valuable. So we might have data, and then we'll use that data to turn into insights. So we can make assumptions based on data. And then once we're able to develop insights from that data, we can then turn that into action. And by action, it's decisions that we can make. Data is generally all about helping us make higher quality decisions. So more accurate, faster decisions. An example of this is if we look at this generic website here, we've got 1 million hits in February, 1.5 in 1 million in January, 1.5 in February, 500 in March, 1.8 in April. So what we can see here is that there's an anomalous pattern, and we've got 500,000 hits in March. Now, with that information, we can say our website probably would, well, we can investigate that, and we can say our website went down in March, which meant that we had a lot of people who missed the website. And then based on that information, we can then make a decision to, for example, change website host. So it's about having some form of data that we track, then turning that data into some sort of insight, and then with that information, we can make more actionable decisions. Bear with me. Okay, so a lot of you may have heard these terms, and if you have, my apologies, I'll be very quick. One thing that's really important is that we use a lot of acronyms, probably a bit too many, but these acronyms help us understand certain concepts. So one of the most common that we use are metrics and KPIs. A metric is usually a defined, fixed, and usually quantifiable indicator of something. So usually these are bits of data by themselves, which don't necessarily provide us much context, but give us an indicator of something. They give us some measurement. Examples include website hits, so how many people visited a website during a period of time, how many emails were sent from a campaign as an example, ads clicked, so how many ads a user may have clicked, and they're absolute units, usually. They're not, they're usually like fixed units. Then we get key performance indicators. Key performance indicators are usually the performance of metrics over time. So the definition I've given is a measurable value that demonstrates how effectively a company is achieving key business objectives. So for example, we might have click-through rate, which is how many people who saw something actually clicked on it. This might be an ad, a piece of content, or maybe a search result. We have email open rate, how many, what percentage of people who received an email actually opened it, or monthly page growth. How many people, what was the increase in page visits month on month for a period of time? And what we can see here is that they're often measured in percentages. Not always, but sometimes. So these are two very important concepts to understand because we use them a lot, whether that's in tools such as Google Analytics or even MailChimp, or when communicating with other people. If this doesn't make sense to you, feel free to tweet me, email me. There's lots of great information about this on the web, but I'm happy to go and speak to you one-on-one if that would help. So one thing to remember is that not all data is equal. An example of this is this little exercise here. So if you're watching this live, feel free to pause it. But essentially what I want to do is run a little, ask you a question. Imagine this website, and these are fictional numbers. Imagine this website received 320,948 website visitors in June. And then in July, they received 298,711 website visitors in July. In which of those months did we get more newsletter signups? Now, feel free to pause and have a think about this. Feel free to tweet me the answer. Okay, so if you've I'm going to share the answer. So if you haven't paused yet, feel free to. If you have, fantastic. So it's kind of a trick question because at the end of the day, we don't actually know what percentage of people who visited the website actually signed up, because we might find that only 1% of people who visited in June actually signed up, but actually in July we had 5%. So what's important is understanding the value of each metric and each piece of data, because not all of it is going to be the same value. And it's really important to understand context when trying to make higher quality decisions from individual metrics. And what I want to introduce to you here is the concept of vanity metrics. Now, vanity metrics are a very, very common concept, unfortunately a bit too common. And they're any metric that you can't make commercial or business decisions from, or that aren't sort of high level. So it's very easy for me to say we have lots of website traffic, but very few of that signed up. Or we sent 1 million emails out, but only 2 were opened. These are cool metrics that feel good, but don't necessarily offer much in the way of value. The thing is, though, they are valuable if you understand the context behind them. but a lot of people use them as a way of showing off their brand that feels good, but might not be directly attributed to like your objective commercial goals. Metrics and KPIs that feel good but are not directly attributable to bottom line growth or your North Star metric. So I love this this little cartoon over here. And the thing is that with a lot of these pieces of content here, it's very a lot of these metrics or KPIs here. It's very difficult to specifically value each of these because we don't necessarily know without context which of them is going to result in close adherence to our commercial goals or objectives. So some just random generic examples. Which of these are closer to vanity metrics than others? So these over here, website hits, how many people will follow you on different social media platforms, impressions, or even clicks versus paying users, retention, signups. So these are things that often result in, they're not vanity metrics. You're able to make decisions based on this information versus over here, which are nice to have, but unless this is generating revenue, if you're a post product market fit company, then it's not necessarily going to be that valuable. So if you've never had a product hunt, it's a fantastic website for spending a lot of time, as I do. And it's a website a bit like Reddit, where people upload products that they've created or startups, and people upvote them based on how much they like them. And you can also, I think, sponsor. And it's a great place to discover new products. It's a great place to discover new startups. And a lot of cool startups have first raised awareness on this website. And I was working with a company that was trying to raise a funding round. And what they did is they uploaded it to Product Hunt. And I was really excited. And over the course of the day, we received, I think it was just under 1 million hits. And I was super excited about this because I was the head of growth and I was trying to help them raise awareness, get more signups, these kind of things. So they went on Product Hunt. They received just under 1 million hits. And then we looked at how many people signed up from that. And we found that we had a 1% increase on average signups, only 1%, which was nothing because this was a tiny startup. And the thing is that although it was great saying we received 1 million hits or just under 1 million hits, when we actually look at how much revenue we generated, it was very, very little. And what happens there is that it's very easy to just talk about vanity metrics or just to be excited about how many people visited, but then realize how few of these people actually contributed to the goals of our business. And it's just a very important concept to understand because it's very easy to bias yourself and to bias other people by focusing on the wrong types of numbers. So key performance indicators, they're pretty self-explanatory, but they're essentially a indicator that allows us to understand our progress towards a particular goal. So they can be used in all parts of a business, not just marketing. Some example KPIs include customer acquisition cost, how much it costs to acquire a customer, lifetime value, how much money a particular customer will spend with a company during their lifetime with the company, and return on investment, how much money a company makes on an investment such as a ad campaign. North Star metrics. So this is a very important and very misunderstood concept. So a North Star metric is an indicator to understand if people are using the core value of your product. And that can be a bit daunting because how do you define a metric that is that valuable? So generally most businesses have one, maybe two North Star metrics. And the goal is that you can look at that metric and you can say to yourself whether or not the business is doing well or not, purely by looking at that. With every other KPI, with every other metric, you sort of have to look at it in context and you have to look at it in relationship to other metrics in order to understand the value of it. The goal of the North Star metric is if this number changes up or maybe down, depending on what the metric is, we can say that we are hitting the primary objective that we want for our business. So usually I would have a task here where you create your own North Star metric, but obviously it's kind of difficult to do. So what I'm going to do is feel free to do this, tweet me, email me, and I will share my feedback on your task. Just some examples here. So this is a bit old school, but essentially these are North Star metrics of popular B2C companies. So monthly active users for Facebook, how many people log in each month. Spotify's North Star is how much time people spend listening. Amazon is the number of purchases a person makes per month. Airbnb's is how many nights a person's booked. LinkedIn is monthly active users. WhatsApp is message send. Core is number of answers to questions. Uber is rides per week. HubSpot is weekly active teams, and Slack is daily active users. So what you'll see is that certain business models share similar metrics, and a lot of them are sort of unique to their business. So for example, Spotify is time spent listening. I would argue that probably Audible has a very similar one because they're a similar business model. So think about your business model and think about what is it that you can look at that shows if someone is using the core value of your product. Spotify's time spent listening is because the core value of their product is the music and now podcasts. And the more time that someone spends listening to that, the more value they experience. Same with Airbnb, same with like WhatsApp and Uber. You know, it's pretty flexible. Not pretty flexible. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it can be difficult to come up with if you're not sort of one of those businesses. So feel free to message me yours, and I'll give you my feedback. So here's a graph, and the main purpose of this graph is essentially to show you that the way KPIs and metrics work is by building them up from the foundation. So you start with metrics and you work your way up to your BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal. And I'll get onto that in a second. So at the bottom, you might start with metrics that make up these KPIs. So right at the bottom, you might have website hits. And I told you they're not completely useless. It's about understanding them in relation to others. So website hits, metrics that make up these KPIs. So you might have, just a certain amount of website hits at the bottom. Then you have KPIs, which is your cost per acquisition as an example. Now, the example that I've given is this sort of fake Netflix competitor. Or like, imagine this is Netflix. You might at the beginning have how many people visited the website. Top level KPI might be cost per acquisition. North Star metric might be hours of Netflix watched. And then above the North Star metric, you might have your marketing goal. And your marketing goal in this context might be increase your North Star metric by 5% in 6 months. Then your commercial and business goal might be grow revenue by 10% in 5 months. And your big, hairy, audacious goal, and I forgot which book that's from, might be the dominant streaming service. So the way that it works is that you start at the top. What is your ultimate goal for your entire sort of business? And then you break that down. Okay, so what is the business goal in order to achieve that? And then, okay, what is the marketing goal in order to achieve the commercial and business goal? And what is the North Star metric to sort of focus on? And then in order to establish the North Star metric, we have to think about what is our top level KPIs, and then what makes up those KPIs, what metrics make up those KPIs. So there's a whole order of how we sort of set goals and how we think about goals. Again, I hope this makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to message me and I will work on that. So now that we're partly way through, we have to think about what is the purpose of a startup. So Steve Blank, who launched the Lean Startup Movement and is the author of the Lean Startup, which is a fantastic book and sort of the Bible in the startup industry, highly recommend you look at it, says a startup is an organization formed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. Paul Graham, very famous founder and co-founder of the Y Combinator Accelerator program, said a startup is a company designed to grow fast. So we've got these two sort of general concepts here. Now that we've got all this information, I'm very excited to actually talk a bit about what growth marketing is. So in order for us to achieve the goals of being a startup, which is find a successful business model and grow quickly, we have to validate or invalidate our assumptions. Because when we're starting a startup, we don't necessarily have tons of information about what's true or not. So our goal is to establish the boundaries of what is true, what can we rely on and what can't we. So for example, we might have a particular understanding that our customers are a certain demographic or a certain market, when in fact they're, they might not be. We have assumptions that our product solves their problem, or that maybe our messaging does. So we've got a whole bunch of assumptions. In order to validate or invalidate those assumptions, we have to perform tests to gather data. We have to experiment. We have to turn those assumptions into tests, and then test that to understand what's true or not, which of our assumptions are true. And then with that information, we get more data, which leads us to have more insights, which leads us to make better decisions. With that better decision-making capacity, we now achieve faster growth and increase the likelihood of finding a viable business model. So it's pretty it's very circular, this process. In order to achieve these goals, we validate assumptions, we perform tests to gather data, we use that data to make better decisions, which helps us achieve faster growth and increase the likelihood of finding viable startups. So I hope that makes sense. Again, message me. Now, what actually is growth marketing? Now, a simple answer that I like to use is a process of experimentation to test ideas and see what works. To break this down a bit further, we have process. By process, I mean it's an ongoing activity throughout the life cycle of a business. You should never sort of stay stagnant. It should always continue. It's not a linear activity. And experimentation. So this is essentially a process of testing stuff. We have a lot of ideas, assumptions. So we come up with them. We write them down, ideally in some sort of structured format. We then perform those tests, and then we review the data that we get from them. So a process of experimentation to see what works and what doesn't. And this is essentially like validate or invalidate our assumptions. So that's the simple idea. Now, to build upon that a bit more, we're going to be looking at this answer. So this is the slightly more complicated answer, but don't worry, we'll be breaking it down. A holistic and cross-disciplinary process designed to enable an organization to achieve its North Star goal through experimentation across a full user journey. So it sounds quite complicated, but don't worry, it's not too complicated. And I'll be breaking it down a lot as well. And I use this definition, or I came up with this definition. Will probably change over time, but I'm pretty happy with it so far. So by holistic, I basically mean that everything is connected to each other. Every part of your business, whether that's product, marketing, design, leadership as your CEO, finance, whatever it is, everything is intrinsically linked to each other, and you need everything in order to grow a company. And the way that I like to talk about it is, a car has multiple different parts to it. There's the suspension, the engine, the steering, the electrics, transmission, brakes, exhaust, car body. And all of them by its own is fairly important. But it's about how it works together, where it really achieves synergy and where it really helps the car to go from A to B. And it's the same with a startup. It's all about the individual components that, when put together, help to achieve the growth that you're looking to achieve. Cross-disciplinary. So this kind of ties into holistic, and essentially what it means is everyone in a business is responsible for growth. Whether you're the CEO or whether you're the office manager, whether you're a developer, whether you're the product manager, whether you're accounts, it doesn't really matter, because everyone's responsibility is to help find a repeatable and scalable business model and to validate or invalidate your business. So everyone is responsible. And I think it's really important to ensure that from the leadership perspective, you communicate the value of growth to each person, so each person understands their responsibility and how they contribute to that bigger goal. Because that will help motivate people and understand the context in which they're working. So why is growth marketing important? Over the past few years, so this is a pretty old image, but over the past few years, we've seen a rapid increase in the amount of startups going from, just being founded to $1 billion in valuation. And this is a rather crude measurement of judging value of a company, but it's significantly increasing. In fact, I'm pretty sure since this image was created, there's been a lot more. But we can see that back in the day, it took HP 20 years, it took Microsoft 10 years, Dell 7 years, Amazon 4 years, and Instagram 2 years, Slack only 8 months, I think. And then we've got, fintech startups like Brex, which took, I think, 4 months. And I believe that this is due to the iterative way that startups are looking at growth. They are not looking at the same sort of legacy processes that HP and Microsoft were looking at, but they were looking at how do we make decisions faster? How do we gather data faster? How do we take action faster? I believe that it's very much due to this iterative lean process that Steve Blank talks about in his book, The Lean Startup, that has resulted in this. And it will only continue to get faster as people become more data-driven, as people become more iterative, as people make faster decisions. One really important concept in sort of marketing in general and growth marketing especially is the growth funnel. So this is a funnel created by Dave McClure, and it's called Pirate Metrics. And that's because the first letter of each one goes R, which I quite like. And the way it works is this is a funnel that we use to understand or categorize where people are in the user journey. So people start at the top and then they finish at the bottom, ideally. And at each point, people will drop out depending on the business. And it's fairly flexible, as in you can use this funnel for most business models. So we start at awareness when your customer first discovers your brand. So this is, for example, you might write a blog post that appears on a website and someone might see that blog post on that website. This might be an ad that someone sees. This might be word of mouth. Their friend might mention your brand to them. Acquisition is when a customer first takes action with your brand or engages your brand. So this might be clicking on an ad. This might be visiting the website. This might be doing something along those lines. Activation is essentially when someone engages in your brand. So they might this is when someone experiences the value of your product generally. Then we have revenue, so when someone pays for your product or service. Retention, when someone becomes either a repeat customer or basically they become a long-term high-value customer. And then the goal at the end is once they've experienced the value and they're big fans of your product, they'll then hit the referral stage. And it's at this stage they'll tell their friends about it because it's a lot easier to sell stuff to people from your existing customers than it is to sort of have a cold relationship and develop that relationship cold with new customers. So conventional versus growth funnel. One of the important concepts is that sort of old school linear marketing generally focuses on what's called top of the funnel, which is focusing at the beginning stages, awareness and acquisition. Good growth marketing looks at the entire relationship of a customer and how they experience the value of a brand throughout the lifetime of the brand customer relationship, starting with awareness at the beginning, going through acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. And what we do is we measure how people progress through from discovering our brand to becoming an active user to recommending the product to other people. And what I've done here is I've created a fictional funnel that is a fake e-commerce store with some fake numbers, and these numbers are really, really good. So if your e-commerce store is doing it, let me know, and I will definitely be interested in investing. So what we do is we assign KPIs and metrics to understand how people progress from each stage. And it's almost more important to look at the percentage change than it is to look at the absolute metrics. Because on their own, if we just saw 10,000 people hit the activation stage, and we didn't see any of these other metrics, we might think to ourselves, that's amazing. But then when we realize that actually, this might have been 1 million, then we realize that actually that's really poor. So it's only in context, and it's about the relationship between each stage and how it changes. That's a really important part. Also remember, these metrics and KPIs might not be valid for your business, and that's absolutely fine. Feel free to ignore it in that case. But this is just designed to give you some rough context. So with our fake e-commerce store, we might have month on we might have awareness, and for awareness, we'll look at reach and impressions. So how many people first discovered our brand? So, for example, say it's a million people saw our brand, and then out of that million people, we found that 10% clicked on it. So out of the million people, we had 10% click on it. Now that's actually a pretty good rate, and I'm pretty happy with that. And then out of that 10%, 10% actually created accounts. And again, that's really, really good. And if you can get that. And then out of those 10%, we had 75% actually order, which is fantastic. And then out of that 75% that ordered, we found that 50% actually, or more than 50%, actually became long-term customers, and they purchased again and again. And then out of those 5,000 people that purchased repeatedly, we found that 1 in 5 actually shared this with their friends because they love the product or service so much. So what we can say is that this is a really good growth funnel based on sort of industry standards and also maybe say past data. And the goal is to look at which stage is having the biggest issue and how do we optimize it? Because if all of these numbers were great, except signups to orders process was significantly lower, then we might say there's a problem between those two different stages. So I hope that makes sense to you, and we'll be talking about it in a bit more depth later on. So just bear with me. I'm very dehydrated. Okay, the growth marketing planning process. So here are a few frameworks that we use to help us understand our customers more effectively so that we can create more appropriate experiments as we move. So the number one most important is a customer persona. So a customer persona, for those who don't know, is essentially a document that helps us sort of assemble and collect all the customer research that we've done in a particular way to contextualize all that information. So we might have collected a bunch of different user data based on phone calls, based on our own research, based on assumptions maybe. But what happens is that it turns into lots of different bits of data, and it's very difficult to take action on that. But by assembling it into one piece of information and make sure it's all sort of contextually relevant, what that allows us to do is make better decisions by thinking about our customer, the problems that they face, and how our product solves those problems, so that we can create more defined ad campaigns, we can create more defined copy, more defined creative, and basically just be more customer driven as we're doing stuff. If you don't have a customer persona, I highly recommend you create one. And what I find really useful about them, or what I find really important actually, is that you don't just create it and you lose it on your Google Drive. You create it and you stick it on your wall. The customer persona is a living, breathing, evolving document that should develop as you gain a better awareness and understanding of who your customer is. At the beginning, it's expected not to be very accurate, but over time, it should become increasingly accurate. And you can have more than one. But at the beginning, I recommend try and minimize that as much as possible because you don't want to be optimizing for multiple different types of people. Now, customer research is really important. The more accurate your customer research, the better. There's a lot of places to start depending on where you begin. And a great example of good customer research is through my work with a company called ShopRocket. I was head of marketing for this company a few years ago. We'd done lots of customer research in terms of like interviewing existing customers via email, running surveys, speaking to people on different groups. And we developed this pitch of who we thought our customer was. But it was only after I went to the pub with one in London and I was just casually talking to them that I started to understand the value that they found from our product. We were, using these customer personas to develop campaigns that were achieving sort of okay growth, but not fantastic growth. And what we realized is that we were a team of developers, and sometimes it was very difficult to sort of get that mindset out of not biasing our campaigns by that, because we thought, if our team is developers, our code is very clean. How do how do we market ourselves? Well, we talk about how effective and hyper efficient the code is. But after going for a pint with this customer, I started talking to them about the problems that they faced using our product, about how they described our product to other people. And what we realized is that they didn't care about the cleanliness of the code. They were very untechnical. So they were looking for something that was easy to use, something that was simple. And in fact, when I asked the customer, what are you after? And he said, well, I said to him, if you were sharing this product with a friend, how would you describe it? And he said, oh, it's e-commerce in one line of code. And I thought to myself, wow, I never thought about that. I've been talking about how efficient the JavaScript rendering is, but actually what he was looking for is something really simple. So the closer you can get to your customer, the more first person, the more direct you can get, the better, because you're going to unlock information that you didn't even realize existed. One of the other common mistakes, or in fact, probably the most common mistake, is messaging. Most founders, if you talk to them, they can articulate the value of their product or brand in a networking event. If they're speaking to you one-on-one. But if you're trying to articulate the value and you give them a piece of paper, it can be very difficult to sort of write down what is the unique value of your product or service to a specific customer. I was working with an app not too long ago, and they had their initial customer market was young people, particularly sort of young teens, to help them deal with sort of problems they face in day-to-day life. And what we found is that actually they got really good value from that. But the way that you communicate value is very important, because as a young person, particularly as an early teen, there are certain words that you're going to be more receptive to based on sort of your experiences. And then what we found is that through our analytics, we actually had another market, which was middle-aged men, primarily in the States, who also gained similar value of our product. But we couldn't use the same words that we use with teens for middle-aged Americans, because the teens came from Europe and the middle-aged Americans came from the States. And as such, they have their own sort of connotations and words that mean certain things. Because when we're talking to each other, we already, from our upbringing, from our education, we have certain interpretations and thoughts about what words mean and the value that they bring. And being able to really carefully think about that and being able to really carefully articulate the value proposition so that it's valuable and unique to specific customers is super important. And it's something that we should be thinking about on a day-to-day basis. And most startups don't. They try to be all things to all people. So what I'd recommend is that you use this specific strategic messaging map. I recommend it to pretty much all my clients and most of my mentees, and use it to ensure that you're able to really specifically articulate the value that your company provides, the solution to the problem that your clients or customers have. Jobs to be done. So if you haven't heard of the Jobs to be Done framework, you're missing out. It's a fantastic framework that helps us understand what is the core reasoning that a person wants to use our product or service. And this diagram says it by, people might buy a skateboard, and a skateboard is made up of these individual components. But what they're really looking for is to do a wheelie over a rock. It's that feeling, that satisfaction that you might get. Sort of what is the goal that someone is actually trying to achieve? Theodore Levitt came up with this quote, which said, people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill, they want to buy a 1/4-inch hole. And I love that, because when we buy a product or service, it's very rarely about the individual components that people care about. It's more about what is that activity that product or service helps us achieve, or what is the goal. And it's really important to be constantly thinking about that on a deep level to ensure that we're able to understand all of this and understand our customer effectively. An example of this is the iPod. Most people didn't care about the specific sort of hard drive capacity or RAM or type of CPU. What they cared about is that it allowed us to keep 1,000 songs in our pocket, which was revolutionary at the time. With a Ferrari, some people do care about the specific alloy of the engine, but what people really want is to be able to put your foot on the pedal, hear the roar that comes out the back, and the feeling of adrenaline and how being in a luxurious car makes you feel. You feel important and powerful. Um, and it's the same with the perfume. You look at the ads, very rarely, how do you sort of communicate a smell? It's very difficult. So what they do is they make these glamorous ads and imply, if you buy this perfume, this is the life that you live. Um, so it's about, what is it that it's trying to tell you? So, oh, this is in the wrong place. um, so finally, we're on to growth marketing execution, the bit that you have all been waiting for, and I'm very excited to be going through this. Thank you for bearing with me. A lot of the information that I've given you so far is all about coming up with the right experiments, which we're about to go on to. So ignore the oddly shaded diagram, but here's what I want to do. The execution phase is broken down into 6 main components. So brainstorm, prioritize, test, execute, analyze, systemize. And essentially, we'll be going to all of these in a lot more detail, but that's how the process works. Here is the spreadsheet that will allow you to do this. So this is a very old spreadsheet that I used for a mental health app that I used to be the co-founder of, called EQ. And the goal of this was, we had lots of assumptions of what works and what didn't, but we weren't sure what to do first. So we used this spreadsheet to sort of prioritize and execute and experiment with different ideas. The goal being that we were able to see what worked and what didn't, scale what worked, pause what didn't. Some of these aspects you might be aware of, some of them you might not. That's absolutely fine. So without further ado, the first stage consisted of brainstorming. Brainstorming was essentially coming up with ideas. Now, what I tend to find is that with most founders, brainstorming is not actually the difficult part. Most people understand or have a good awareness of most of the ideas and things they want to use for customer acquisition. But what they're trying to do is figure out, how do I do this in the right order? What do I do first? But what I recommend for most companies is that they run a brainstorming session with their team. And I ideally like to get everyone involved in the company in this. So what I'll do is I'll get the developers, the customer service people, particularly the customer service people, because they're the most customer facing. Get as many people as you can into a room, and then just sort of take off like half a day to come up with ideas. Now, if you're the CEO speaking to a team member, it can be very difficult if you say to that team member, give me all the great marketing ideas you have, because it's difficult to come up with them. So what I like to do is I like to throw in a few sort of wild ideas, and then that gives people the flexibility of like, okay, if Daniel's going to come up with that dumb idea, then I feel safe and comfortable talking about my ideas. Stuff like, okay, what happens if we hire a blimp with our company logo and we take that across the city? Or maybe what happens if we sponsor a spaceship or something? Like just sort of wild and wacky ideas. And we just add all of the ideas. This stage, there's no criticism. It's not about how good or bad idea is. It's just about getting as many down as we can. And what I like to do is categorize these into these 4 main areas. In fact, what I like to do for the entire sheet is that if someone looks at the sheet without me, they can figure out what I'm doing at any time, because that helps me really think through all of my ideas, even if no one else is going to. But it helps me make sure that I've thought about it carefully. So we have channels. So what is the marketing channel that we'll be using? PPC means pay-per-click, so like Google Ads. And then here we have, what is the name of the idea? So Google UAC is Universal App Campaign. It's the old name for Google's app campaigns. Then we have a description. So how do we describe this this campaign? And then maybe subtasks. So what are the tasks that we can also do in addition to the primary campaign? And we list as many of them as possible in as much detail as possible, so that everyone can understand what's going on. And here you can come back and you can take a look at some of these ideas. And these are all sort of channels that you can use to grow your business. This is available also in a book, I believe, called Traction. So one really important thing to think about is this channel, this column here, which is R, S, and P, repeatable, scalable, and predictable. And I use this a lot, and I think it's very important because good growth marketing is all about having repeatable, scalable, and predictable growth. By that, I mean, by repeatable, you can do it again and again. Scalable means that for the input you put in, you'll get proportional out. So, for example, if you're running a Google ad campaign, you put £100 in, say you get £1 per download, you're going to get 100 downloads out. And if you put in 1,000, you get 1,000. And if you put in 1,000,000, you'll probably get 1,000,000. So that's scalable. And then predictable, which means with a high degree of certainty, I can predict that this is going to achieve the goals that I wanted to. And what you'll find is that at the beginning, you'll probably have a wide range of things that adhere to being repeatable, scalable, and predictable, and also things that aren't. Long term, you want to focus primarily on the stuff that is only yes, but also you're going to have a few no occasionally. So I've run Google Ads for a long time. I know that they're repeatable, scalable, and predictable if you do them well. And then there are certain things like App Store optimization that is sort of a linear activity. Like you can do it again and again over time as you gather more data, but you kind of do it once off. You wait a while as you gather data, and then you do it again. It's not really repeatable, scalable, and predictable in the same way. It's just very important that you understand this concept because this is like very fundamental. Good growth marketing is all about being repeatable, scalable, and predictable. Stage 2. So once you've brainstormed, the next stage is to prioritize. So you've got all these wonderful ideas down. Now you have to prioritize them. Now, this is a really great way. It's not super scientific, but I find it very effective when you've got a lot of ideas. For each task, assign a number out of 4, talking about how impactful, confident, and easy it is to do that activity. So by impact, I mean, if this is successful, how much of an impact will this have on the commercial or business goals of your startup? So 4 is the highest, 0 is the lowest. By confidence, I mean, how likely do you believe it is that this will achieve the goal that you think it will? And then by ease, how difficult will it be to set up? And I also like to include resources in this one. So if it's going to be very expensive, you might want to drop that down. If it's going to take lots of time, like just lots of man hours, then you might want to drop it down. And then what happens is that with the sheet this sheet will be provided to you, the numbers at the top have the highest calculation or like highest combination of impact, confidence, and ease. And those will be at the top and the lowest will be at the bottom. This allows you to focus on the things that are important, that is likely to achieve the biggest and best goals first, with the stuff that's least likely at the bottom. So as a task, what you can do is come up with a bunch of ideas, assign them an impact, confidence, and ease number, tally the total, order from highest to lowest, and feel free to share that with me and I'll give you some feedback if you'd like. So the next stage is developing an experimentation document. Okay. So once we've prioritized, we then come to the test phase. So the test phase is we have a bunch of ideas that we believe will be successful or likely. So this stage, we now have to figure out how accurate are our assumptions? How accurate is our impact, confidence, and ease? So to do that, we develop a experimentation document. An experimentation document is pretty simple. If you've done science in school, it's likely that you've done this before. So it's simply a case of we believe, well, because we saw a piece of data, so you should ideally base all your assumptions off a specific piece of data. We believe that, or we expect that doing something will cause an impact, and we'll measure this using a specific metric. So what this means is, because we came up with, or because we saw our competitor running a particular ad campaign as an example, we expect that by investing £100 will cause us to get 100 downloads. And then we'll measure the success or failure of this using a specific KPI or metric, which is very simple. Here is a test. Here's a spreadsheet that I created ages ago. I probably need to update it. In fact, if you message me, I'll send you my updated version. So the way that works is test. If I do this, then this will happen because I observed X. Example, if I run Google Ads, we will require customer £1 per download because that is what our competitor is doing. So here is the test that I'm going to be running. And then finally, the results. So we did X, which resulted in Y. And then we talk about whether it's success or failure. And then the why. And I think the why is arguably the most important part that a lot of people miss out. So why talks about if we're successful, fantastic. Why? Did we get our customer correct? Is the experiment the right channel for our customer? There's so many different variables. It's about understanding what are the variables that we got correct in order to achieve that. And if it's a failure, then what do we miss? Was it the channel? Was it the messaging? Was it the experimentation? Like there's so many different potential factors. It's trying to understand what is the end goal so that we have a good understanding of that. So at this stage, we've done our test and then we execute them. We perform the tests and we see what works. And then at this stage, it's implement, execute, and analyze the data. So we review the data from the test. Did the test perform to the standard that we wanted? And then we try to figure out why. So once we've performed a lot of these tests, what we need to try and do is systemize that data. And by systemizing that data, it simply means putting that data together so we can understand the links between the different experiments. We can start understanding or getting a better picture of what experiments worked, what experiments didn't work, and why. What is it about those experiments that achieve the goals that we're looking to achieve? And I like to do this by either creating a Notion, a wiki, or some sort of internal resource that allows us to collect all the different bits of data. And this allows us to understand the relationship between the tests and also helps us if we're onboarding new people so that new people can sort of see the historical value of all the tests. Whole bunch of potential value here. Oh, whoops. I'll share an example of this, which is my Notion board. I find that very valuable. So things to remember during this process. I hate growth hacking. And the reason why I hate growth hacking is because it's not repeatable, scalable, and predictable. When you implement a growth hack, what you tend to find is that it becomes discovered, people optimize it, other people copy it, and then it becomes ineffective. And an example of this is sent with love from Hotmail. So when Hotmail first came out, and I'm not sure if it's Hotmail or AOL or Yahoo or something, but every email sent had at the bottom of it, sent with love from Hotmail. Now, when this first came out, it was very effective because it was a link to the sign up form on Hotmail. And people would click on it and people would sign up and people would be like, oh, this is amazing. And then what happens is that Yahoo and AOL started seeing it. And then they started adding it to the bottom to theirs. And what we found is that people got desensitized by it. It was no longer interesting or effective. So more and more people did it. People didn't care about it. And then it became ineffective. The problem is that if you don't optimize for what works, if you don't do stuff that is repeatable, scalable, and predictable, your business won't succeed long term. It's not sustainable. You can't live on growth hacks. It's all about long-term, high-quality, customer-driven growth. Process is more important than tactics. So growth hacking is a tactic. Process is experimentation. Just think about what are the ongoing activities, the systems that you need to implement to your business that will help you achieve the growth that you're looking for. Focus on scalable, predictable, and repeatable. Follow numbers, not emotion. That simply means, look at the data when making decisions. Examples of this include stuff like if you're creating a campaign and you like certain color choices or certain word choices, think about your customers. Would they like it? Is this their favorite? Bit about me is my background. This is me carrying the papers. I am the founder of We Scale Startups. We're a growth marketing agency for early stage tech startups around the world. Get in touch if you want to chat. happy to discuss our services. Also, just happy to talk about growth problems and challenges that you might be facing. I'm a big growth nerd. I really love talking about it, and I'm happy to share my experience with you. And you can also visit my personal website, where I do sort of consultancy work. I drive scalable, predictable, and repeatable growth. And I also increasingly do more and more speaking work, which you can also find on the website. So feel free to take a look at that. Thank you so much for bearing with me. It's now hit 1 hour and 17 seconds. I really appreciate you taking the time. Everyone's super busy, and I really hope you find this helpful. Remember, if you want to get in touch, feel free to drop me a message at hello@wescalestartups.com or on my Twitter. You can also follow me on all my other social media. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Cheers. Bye.